Hey, everybody. Today we have Alreen Haeggquist with us. A couple things. I want her to talk about her new book. She is a women rights attorney who specializes in sexual harassment. Now, we're all about confidence on this podcast and in my community. But here's the thing, this is a very hard topic to discuss. We hear stories. So many of the women members of our group, we've been afflicted by this, and yet a lot of us stay quiet. I want to have her come on our show so that she can talk. And this way, you have an idea of what can be done. And more importantly, who you can reach out to, who's an expert in this area. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this talk.
No, likewise. Thanks for having me on. My one of my best friends is part of your organization, so I was excited to meet you.
Oh, thank you. So let's step back. How did you get into this? I don't know if law was planned for you, but I know that you had some things happen to you when you were younger. Are you okay discussing that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, so I grew up with a terrifying father. I mean, he was abusive in all the different ways. He was emotionally abusive, he was verbally abusive, he was physically abusive, and he was sexually abusive. And going through that as a child, it left me with a lot of consequences. I was really hopeless and helpless during that time, and I felt really alone. And even though my mother was around and I wanted her to save me, my mom stayed silent. And so my father's abuse and my mom's silence really has shaped me in the sense of I can't be silent about anything. When there is injustice, I have to speak out. The best thing that happened to me was I got to go to college, and going to college and law school when I was growing up, I figured out that was my way out of my household. And so that's why I put all my attention to studying and figuring out how to apply for college, because I was going to be the first one that ever went in my family. And so that was my way out. And I felt free, like getting out of an abusive situation is very freeing. And I also believed because I was out of my abusive situation, the abuse had left me. I was done. I didn't know about trauma. I didn't know the effects of what it could do to you. And I went on to law school, and I became a lawyer. And the reason I became a lawyer was because when I was young, I didn't have any mentors, and there was a spiritual leader that was a lawyer, and that was the only person I was like, oh, okay, well, he's a lawyer and he's doing pretty well, so that's something I can strive for. And that's how law school came to be. But when I was in college and in law school, going against big institutional players was a really big driving force. So people who take advantage of those who are voiceless and disenfranchised really became a passion of mine. And so I, graduated law school, went off to work, and even though I was at a high, after law school, after I got married, I fell to a deep low. And that's when the consequences of the trauma really started surfacing, I would say. I was constantly triggered when I felt like somebody wasn't being honest with me, when I thought I was being manipulated. So I was really triggered. And what I have now learned is that I'm using those triggers to represent my clients. And so my passion lies for representing women who have experienced abuse, not as children necessarily, but they are going through it now as adults, or have gone through it now as adults, and helping them find their voice and stand up for themselves in court. Because that, to me, is what I've learned is by not staying silent and speaking out is really the way to, get your power back.
We hear so much today in society how important it is to speak up, and yet I know that this still goes on. Why do you think that is? Like, have you seen a common theme here?
Yeah, I think it's the consequences of the abuse. It's that shame and fear that is inside you based on what happened that keeps you silent. And it's dismantling that fear and shame so you can speak out. And that's why I, wrote my book. I shared my story. I'd never shared it before, but it was so important for me to help other people break the silence that I needed to share my own publicly.
How's the name of the title?
That's Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma.
Perfect. So you share your story. So if anyone's not going to work with you, at least start there. Please go out and get the book. You could sit in the comforts of your home. You can hide the book if you need to, but start looking into it and helping yourself. So, what are some tips that you can give for the women who are out there? Maybe if it's not them, perhaps they know a friend that they can share this podcast with. What are some tips that you can recommend as far as if someone feels like they're being sexually harassed? What do they
Sure,
do?
sure. One is know your rights. I think that is like so powerful, right? Like you have rights, even though you might have been made to believe you don't. All the laws are there to protect you. As a society, we all agree that sexual harassment in the workplace is not okay. We all agree as a society that sexual assault is not okay. We all agree that sexual abuse is not okay. So knowing that, I think, is really powerful, and knowing that you have the right to speak up without being retaliated against is really powerful. So if you're going through that, and you're having a hard time, expressing yourself, either um, to say no, or you've said no and it won't stop, my recommendation is always to write it down, right? To write down what's going on to you, because contemporaneous records are always, really valuable if you do decide to pursue a case later on. Report the conduct to either your supervisor or to HR, as to what's going on. And then if that's not working, seek advice from a lawyer. And if you're scared to report it to HR, seek the advice of a lawyer before that. So you feel confident in knowing that you can say something and not, feel the repercussions.
What if you go to HR and you feel like they're not doing anything? You feel like no one is listening to you.
Yeah, and that does happen. I mean, that's why I have a practice doing that. So you get a lawyer, they have an obligation to do something about it. And they have an obligation to investigate the issue, right? To hear not only from you, but to hear from the harasser and to hear from witnesses. They have an obligation to keep the harasser out of the workplace, and they have an obligation not to retaliate against you for speaking out. And retaliation is not just termination, but all of a sudden your performance goes down, or to not demote you or reduce your pay, or not give you, the favorable assignments that you used to get. So again, I think knowing that is powerful. And I also think it's really important when you're experiencing it to not stay quiet about it. But I understand how hard it is, to speak out. And so you can start taking little steps, like you can journal to yourself. That's always just like a really easy step to take, because it's not out to anybody else, it's just to yourself. You can send an email to yourself as to what's going on. And then, if you really need it to stop, you do have to report to HR. And if they don't do something, you get a lawyer involved.
Let's talk a little about what women can do. You mentioned journaling. This is a woman who is frightened. She feels totally alone. She maybe doesn't have a support system either in her house or in her environment. What are some things that you think over the years that you've been doing this can help build up that self-confidence, self-esteem? Because it really, you do get hurt with this. Like, I can't help but think like, there'll be some self-reflection, like I caused this, or I did this, or I brought this on. This is not the first time. What is it about me? Like a lot of those questions, right? So then what tips can you give to those women who may be listening out there who can resonate with what I just said?
Sure. So one, you're not alone. At least 50% of women have experienced some form of sexual assault. And I believe that number is low because of underreporting. So just knowing the fact that you're not alone, half the women out there have experienced this, and the feelings you're experiencing are a consequence of the abuse or of the harassment. So just know that. And I feel like that's comforting to some degree, to know that. Secondly, kind of, get it out, right? Like stop keeping it inside and get it out in some way. So that's why I recommend journaling, just because I think that's an easy step. Three, building a team, I think, is really important. Getting, if you don't have, friends that are supportive or are kind of doing what you just, all those kind of the blaming, blaming and shaming you, maybe find some new friends for right now. That will be supportive, because there are plenty of people out there to support you. And whether it be a coach, a therapist, a friend, a coworker, a lawyer, get your team involved. Three, I didn't file, a lawsuit when I was a child or anything, but I think getting help from a lawyer is really important, because at our firm, for example, when you come see us, you have a whole team, that is there to support you. So for example, we have a survivor advocate on our team, and that person's role is really to help you in between the lawyer and the litigation process, right? Like, because it's unfamiliar territory for a lot of people. And so she's there to support you, kind of like the emotional part of standing up for yourself. I think therapy for me has been huge. I went into therapy thinking I was going to go in, I was going to have 4 sessions, and I'd go on my merry way because everything would have been solved by then. But continuing with a therapist has really been helpful, because new things come up all the time. I think identifying why you're doing it is really important. For me, the consequences of my trauma was affecting my relationship with my husband, and it was affecting my relationship with my daughter. And so I wanted to be better for them. And so identifying your why you're doing it. A lot of clients come to me now and they say, well, I have to do something because I don't want my daughter to think that I was okay with what happened to me. I want my daughter to know that she can also say something if she experiences this. And I want my daughter to know that it's not okay. And so finding your why as to why you're coming forward, I think, is also really helpful.
Alreen, really great advice. Let's talk about your book. I know you share your story. What else is in that book? Why people should buy it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of go into the same things that I'm talking about now. It goes through, my story, and then the practical steps that I took from healing, from abuse. Recognizing that there are consequences, like even though you might be done with it, it's not done with you, and you have to take some steps. And so it's providing you some advice on steps you can take, and how you get your power back, how you can get back into control by speaking your truth.
Where could people get a hold of you?
You can go straight to my website. It's Alreen, ALREEN.com. And if you're interested in the book, you can get a free chapter of the book to learn more. There's also my firm's website if you are looking, for purposes of litigation in the workplace. The firm website is haelaw.com.
I'll have that in the show notes, ladies.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.